The Marino Show. Hello, everyone. Welcome to The Marino Show. I'm your host, David Marino. Today, I'm talking to John Isberg. He is the writer, director, producer, cinematographer, everything for the film Final Summer. It's really a throwback to those 80s slashers, but it's so much more than that. It's a great film. John, thank you so much for being with me today.
Oh, yeah. Thank you so much for having me here. Yeah. We were just talking about Final Exam, and that's why I remember seeing that, and I was like, "Oh man!" So it was kind of cool. It's awesome to be here. Thank you.
Yeah, so that's how we connected. You reached out on Instagram because we both have a love for this film, Final Exam. This is the soundtrack on vinyl. I'm dating myself, but anybody out there who's ever seen it, it's a slasher film from the early '80s, but didn't get the kind of credit or kind of the success that some of those other slasher films got. So when I saw your film, when we started talking on Instagram, and then you said, "Oh, I have this film, Final Summer," and I watched it and I absolutely loved it because it really took me back to it's its own thing, but it has some kind of throwbacks to the 80s slashers. So tell our audience out there what Final Summer is about.
Sure. It's set in 1991, so basically it's the final day of camp in 1991 at the summer camp, and this tragedy happens. And so as the counselors are trying to kind of cope with this tragedy, there's a killer that is waiting for them in the woods. And and then it just kind of completely goes sideways from there. So yeah.
Yeah, I don't want to give too much away because it's not streaming yet, but it's expected to be later in the summer, right?
Yeah. So it should be hitting streaming later this summer. So yeah.
Also, it has a somewhat of a Friday the 13th connection. Tom Matthews, who played Tommy Jarvis in Friday the 13th Part 6, Jason Lives, he's in it, right?
Oh yeah, yeah. So that's awesome. It was a huge having him in the film. It was really a big thrill actually to work with him. It was a lot of fun.
How did you end up getting connected with him, and how did you end up reaching out to him to be in the film? I'm sure that must have been amazing for you, for him to say yes, right?
Oh yeah, yeah. I mean, it was originally we were going to have Neil Affleck from My Bloody Valentine was going to be in the film. And then just through COVID, because we shot it in August of 2021. And so the pandemic was still pretty, in its heyday. And I think he had to drop out because he was out of Toronto. And so there's a lot of stuff with visa. And then I just kind of looked around and I'm thinking like, who would be kind of fun to have in this film? And I just kept thinking, man, I love Tom Matthews. He's great, Return of the Living Dead. And then, of course, playing Tommy Jarvis. I thought that would be really kind of great because I'm a big fan too. And so I think, to go back to a lot of these films that are that were kind of informative for us, all the Fridays. I was a kid in the 80s. I couldn't watch them, but, hearing about them and listening to Roger Ebert, like hate on them on the Siskel and Ebert stuff kind of made me a fan in a way. So, yeah.
Yeah, I think the more that the worse the review, the more I wanted to see it.
Right.
It's funny because I actually did watch them when I was growing up in the 80s. My mom hated it, but my dad liked horror movies too, but my dad thought they were funny. Well, we would watch the Friday the 13th, and my dad loved Jason and just thought he was hilarious. My dad had a morbid sense of humor. So those films were they're such a part of like my life then and even now, as for you. So making this film, I know it was a labor of love. And as an indie filmmaker, there's so many hats that you have to wear. As I mentioned in the intro of the show, you do it all, right? You write, direct, shoot. So what was that like, having to carry that load with this film? And I'll tell you, I mentioned it in our messages, the cinematography is great. I love the drone shots. I love the aesthetic, just the way you gave it that sort of that gritty look, but it it's still current. I don't know how to explain it. It's you just
Yeah.
people see it, they'll know.
Back in 1978, there was a terrible fire here. Some kids left a campfire alone. Winds picked up and it started to grow. The fire spread through the forest, burning everything in its path. They dug into the ground as their last hope. One of the rangers, a man named Warren Copper, started chopping a tree, trying to start a fire line. After the fire passed, all they could find was Warren's charred skeleton. Years later, locals claimed to see this strange figure with a skull for a head, carrying an axe, guarding the woods in the middle of the night. Better run, because Warren Copper will come for you.
You know, that like I just go back to Tobe Hooper's Funhouse. I love that kind of, there's a softness to the image that I really like a lot. Like you mentioned, the grind, like looking at Texas Chainsaw Massacre, like the original one, like Tobe Hooper's Texas Chainsaw, and just the look of it was great. And so and then to go to Halloween, even with like Dean Cundy shot that one. I love that anamorphic kind of look. And so I wanted to do something that if you saw it, it would feel like a film that you had just never heard about from the 80s. Like, what is Final Summer? You know, I was about to say Final Exam. It's like, what is this film? How come I've never heard about it before? And so, and you know, into that side of things, it's like you can't really do it like a modern film, where modern films are like super clinically sharp. It's shot in 8K, looks crazily tack sharp or whatever, and just doesn't have that feel of the grit and that kind of grindhouse feel of the 70s and 80s films. And so I kind of wanted that feel for it, but then also to kind of take the modern side where I want to see in the dark, you know, at night, you know. So like in the original Friday the 13th, man, she's like walking through, it looks like a black box at some points, you know. There's like, I'm like, could you at least throw a light back behind her so you could see something? And so that was kind of part of it. It was also the first time I'd ever shot anamorphic. I shot a lot of spherical before then. And so it was a bit of a learning curve. And then there are things that you just never think about when you're shooting your film, when you've never seen a film you've shot on a movie theater, where when we finally I'm seeing it in theaters and stuff like that, I'm seeing like, wow, I need to like do more medium shots, because close-ups, you're looking at someone's head 20 feet tall on a screen. And so it can feel kind of, so I think that going forward, there's a lot of lessons that I'm going to take from this first one to the sequel, which I'm really excited about. And I've been in that world lately of world building and you know, all that. But anyway, I just love those movies of the 80s. And, you know, when I go to the movie theater, you know, and they have the flashback cinema, you know, and you're seeing films from the 80s, like, you know, coming attractions. I'm like, that's exactly how I feel my film, or Final Summer feels to me. It feels like from that era. So but I think for modern audiences, it can be an acquired taste because we're so used to everything so crisp, you know, and so.
But I guess because, you know, I grew up in that era, you were around during the 80s. And so I very much love that old school kind of feel.
Yeah.
You know, aside from obviously you liking horror films, what was the inspiration behind the story? Because as I was watching, a huge theme that came up was trauma, specifically childhood trauma, when there's like a backstory and one of the characters has some flashbacks. Won't give it away, but that was a theme that I obviously picked up on. What was the inspiration for the film?
Yeah, this film was a really personal film. I was in a really abusive relationship with someone who was basically a sociopath, like a malignant narcissistic sociopath, they might call him, antisocial personality disorder. But and I got a lot of PTSD, some really bad PTSD for a while. Went through a lot of therapy and everything, but it was pretty terrifying. Like the stuff I went through was a lot of, and like extreme gaslighting, extreme manipulation, pathological lying, lots of like props and lies and stuff like that. And so it took a long time for me to kind of get out of that. One, to like escape this person, because then I became, like with someone like that, everybody, it's like you're not really a real person to them. You are a tool for good or for bad. And so they can use you to their benefit in a way that will benefit you, and then they can use you in a way that's going to benefit them in a way that's going to destroy you. And I experienced both of that. And so I started to, as I was getting out of that, I was scared to death of like women for a long time. I just started to identify with the final girl character in slasher films. I love slasher films. I grew up on them. And I started to see how, like when you go through something so crazy, it becomes hard to really relate to other people. And I could somehow relate to these movies, which just seems nuts, way like you don't really want to relate to Halloween, but you do. And so I started thinking about, this, like, one, I was doing this indie film workshop in Champaign, just working with a lot of like college and non-traditional students just for free. Like every week we would do like a workshop where we just get together with cameras and just do all sorts of lighting stuff and work with actors. But I wanted to make a film, and I felt like, all right, I love slashers and I love horror, let's do this. But to make it personal, to make it kind of a little bit more unique, that's where I lean into a lot of my personal experience. And especially with the villain too, I think that the villain was probably the easiest character to write because I would think about what would really happen in the situation. And it's like you wouldn't get the Scooby-Doo Scream 7 ending where they're telling you all of the things. You'd get someone gaslighting you to the end, telling you like, you are the one doing this. Mm-hmm. And then I taught middle school, special education, and I taught kids with emotional disabilities for 4 years. And so their primary label was like emotional disability. All of them had PTSD. PTSD can look like ADHD too. And so I wanted to put a lot of that fight or flight that I saw working with those kids into the film. And so the feeling, because to go to the main character, a lot of what happens in abuse is these feelings of shame, and it's ridiculous because you should not feel ashamed of the fact that this person did this to you. You know what I mean? Like you shouldn't feel ashamed. It wasn't your fault at all. You were kind of in the eye of the storm for a lot of these things, and I think that was the thing. A lot of these kids carried so much shame. I carried a lot of it too, and so I wanted to put that into the character. So at the end, you have this. Anyway, I don't want to get into the end, but I wanted to talk about that because then sometimes PTSD can look scary to people who don't know what it is. You can get into that what I call the tunnel. And, my dad, he was a paramedic for 35 years. He had PTSD pretty bad. And we didn't know what to put a name to it. It wasn't only until later when you're like, everything now makes sense, And so I think that, it's, I don't know that I always want to talk about all the stuff I went through when I go to a film festival. But I think the coolest thing is that I've met a lot of people through the film who have been through similar situations. And I feel like if anybody can like watch the film and relate to like the final girl and the things in the film, I think that's powerful because, the fact that you're still there at the end, that you're standing, all the stuff that they try to destroy you, but you're still there is really powerful. And so I think that, to me, that's exciting if people can identify with that,
And it's crazy that you say that exactly the way you said it, with the final girl being able to relate, because I did an interview with one of the actors from the Friday films. I believe it was Melanie Kinnaman. You can go back and watch it.
Oh, yeah.
It might, yeah, if you see any of those, or I also interviewed some other actors with the films. But one of the things that I said was I always felt like I related to the final girl, which a lot of times people don't relate to that. And my reason was, and we talked about horror, and I brought this subject up, and I tend to bring it up with people that either love horror or they make it, is I always feel like you relate to it and people don't get it. But like for me, I didn't deal with what you dealt with, but growing up, you know, I had a great family, all of that, but I got like made fun of a lot, like for being gay, right? And of course, now I'm comfortable with who I am. But when you're a kid and you go through those kinds of things and you're made to feel like who you are is not good or it's bad, especially in the late 80s.
Oh, yeah.
AIDS was, you know, it was associated with being gay. So I carried a lot of that with me, and I still go to therapy. You know, I carried a lot of that with me. But the thing about horror films for me has always been that it was an escape because I just liked them. But then I realized I identified with the survivor, and I loved watching the end of those films when they get away, because there was something about that was so, and it's going to sound weird, therapeutic and felt relatable. Like, yes, she kicked his ass, you know, and it's like you want to be that person. And so I feel like a lot of people that love horror have dealt with, they're different, or they were marginalized. And so when you said that, it brought that back for me. So I've never heard somebody else say that. And that's why I love the horror community. Have you found that to be the case, that it's just people seem to be, they're so supportive of either the filmmakers or the films themselves?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's been just incredible. I think one of my favorite things now is like when we get to play at a horror convention, horror festival, like Days of the Dead or Horror Hound. I mean, it's like this amazing community of people who love the same thing you do, which is always great. But then it's like everybody has all these stories, and it's kind of wonderful to, you know, I think sometimes like when you don't pursue your passion, or you kind of put it to aside to do the normal thing, you miss out on all those things. And I feel like I was telling my kids, like, I feel the closest I've ever felt to being 12 through doing this, even though some days it's like I feel like I'm 85 and I'm lifting the world, and I'm just wondering how I'm ever going to, you know, get through all this. But I think it's like the passion keeps you young and connected. And I think like, to go to the trauma thing, I think and to gaslighting is like they shape your reality so much that you begin to view this fake thing or this constructed thing as a reality. But community is the thing that breaks all of that. And the community of horror has been so amazing. So I love it. And to go to, I got called the F word all the time when I was in high school. I moved to this small town. I was like instantly the bully magnet, you know, stuff. So I always, you know, could relate to all of those things. And then you see the 80s movies, and there's a lot of homophobic language and everything too. So it's not easy, you know, so as you know, but I can talk for hours.
Yeah. It's a therapy session.
Yeah. I knew it was gonna,
no. So, you know, as you know, there's a lot of work that goes into what you do. What made you take the leap and really go kind of full throttle into filmmaking? Because as you mentioned, you were an educator, you were a musician. We can touch on that as well. What was it that finally pushed you over the edge and you're like, that's it, I'm doing it?
When I was like in middle school and I moved to that small town, I met these two guys who were also outcasts, and one of them had a video camera. And so on the weekend, we would stay over at my buddy Mike's house, and we would just make these terrible like ninja, you know, kung fu movies and whatever, involving us wearing like lots of ridiculous outfits. But I think it was always like this idea, I'm going to be an actor or a filmmaker or something, you know. And then I went to film school after I graduated high school, but then dropped out. because I had ADD, which I didn't know about till I was in my 30s, which made my 20s make sense. But it was really, there was a film that came to town in Champaign in 2014. It was Zoe Lister-Jones was in the film. It's called Consumed, and I just interned on it in the grip department. I didn't know anything about being a grip, and it changed my life. And it was right when I needed it, because I think I had come out of this pretty abusive situation and I was pretty lost. And then this film came to town. It was like I took like 1 million cc's of like vitamin B or something, you know. It was indeed, because I felt like it kind of saved my life. You know, I went from being very afraid and very, you know, just really like kind of heavy PTSD to be on the set where I could feel my confidence coming back and my self-esteem. And it's like, man, at the end of the day, you're on the set, you're doing these shots. I got to do this Dolly with Beth Grant, who was in Donnie Darko, and Victor Garber was on the film too. And it's just, It was like finding a home that you never knew existed and finding this thing that you never thought you were going to do, you know. And it completely saved my life. After it was over, I had to do it. And so in Champaign, you know, we're really not a film community. And so I just found everybody in town that did film, and I just tried to learn from them, this and that. And I bought a T3i, and that led to a Blackmagic cinema camera, to working at this studio in town called Chatterglass. We did the film Revealer, if you saw that on Shudder. And then they had a red camera. So I would just bug them all the time to get in there, and and I think it just led from that, and then started doing music videos, commercial shoots, documentary, everything I could do. And then finally we did a music video for my friend Jeff, who played in Smashing Pumpkins, and it was probably the biggest like scale that I had worked at, and I felt like I'm ready for this. Like I'd worked on other feature films, and I had a lot of really good mentors, cinematographer mentors, this guy Ace, who was the first AD. And I think it was kind of like one of those moments where like the crew worked so well on that Night Dreamer shoot. And I feel like I kicked their butts doing this thing, you know? and they all came through, and I was like, and I just felt like we have to make it happen. It's the next step. And it's one of those things where no one's going to give you the opportunity. So you have to make it happen. And I thought, you know, hey, we'll do a summer camp slasher, one location, right? How hard can that be? And then it was literally like the hardest thing I've ever done. Like I've been in grad school, you know, I went through the Army, and, you know, taught middle school for 4 years with kids who would, you know, give you PTSD, and making a movie was the hardest thing I've ever done. So, yeah.
But you got through it, and it's out there. And
you know,
I've seen on your social media that it's played at several festivals, right?
We kind of premiered at Popcorn Frights last August, and then through each festival, I would take it and recut it a lot, because sometimes, you know, again, this has been the story of making this film is kind of like you don't know what you don't know, which is everything, and then there's all these people who are going to like promise they're going to come along and help you, and then they don't. So then you're kind of stuck, like, all right, now I got to learn how to you know, do this for, you know, the cinema color space, and, you know, now I have to figure out what 5.1 is and all these other things. And so you just kind of go along the way, and then along the way too, there are people that will come onto your team that you don't always expect, that actually end up helping you out in these kind of amazing ways. But it was really tough. But I think the coolest thing about it was to have the flexibility and freedom to, you know, recut scenes, add inserts here. Let's retool this ending. Let's make this tighter, you know, because a lot of indie films, they just don't have that flexibility that we had, because everything is so compartmentalized. You know, this editor is gone on another film now, so whatever. But to have the flexibility and the freedom to rework scenes, to flip scenes around, you know, was really great. So I was really grateful to even have this opportunity.
Party's over, Mike.
Rio, come on.
Oh, so spooky! Look, asshole, we've been looking in the woods all over for your ass. Where you been, huh? Screw you, man. Like that, bitch. Screw him.
Hey, I don't think that's Mike.
So you mentioned a sequel.
Yeah.
So where are you with that?
Oh, interesting. Yeah. So, yeah, I've got actually, so through the festival circuit, I've made a lot of kind of like film friends and producer friends who've come on. And so I've kind of been building a team around the sequel because I feel like also, it's crazy that I'm even talking about the sequel because the first one beat me up so much, I think, because we had these rip-off investors who tried to steal the film 4 days before we started shooting. So I had to they were going to put like $50,000 in, and I had to turn down their money because they were just going to own everything outright. And they were just super shady how they were doing. And then insanely enough, the guys who were going to be the producers in the film, one guy was under investigation by the SEC for stealing $67 million from senior citizens' retirement funds. It's insane. So that guy's under like investigation by the SEC, but he was like our primary, guy for a second there. But he pulled some shady stuff with us, try to steal the film. So we just basically were like, we got this Kickstarter. I got a couple of people that are throwing in some money. The rest I was out of pocket. So if you can give me like 13 days, let's make this film. So it's a literal miracle that any of this has happened. It's so insane. But to go to the sequel, I just, there have been so many things that have happened with this film that I'm so excited about. I feel like there's just something about this film. I don't know what it is, but I feel like there's some synchronicity that's super weird about our film. And just the people that I've met and have come on, and then the story for the sequel, I'm so excited about because it's kind of clicks in a way where you're like, oh man, like if the first one leaves you with a lot of questions, which was kind of my intention, but then I realized I should probably not do that. I feel like the second one really is all about how the truth can be dangerous. So to go to the first one where I feel like the theme is fight or flight, the second one is this idea of truth as danger, where when I was kind of coming out of my situation, I knew what was true, and trying to get people to see what I was going through, like my kind of truth of it, made everything worse, because then now you're threatening this other person who has constructed this elaborate lie for everybody to see that like you're the villain, you're the bad guy or whatever. And so I feel like part two is really fascinating because it kind of goes into that place next in a way. So I think the stakes, are much worse in a way. And then also just learning all the lessons that you learn on your first feature film. I'm like, okay, these are the things to avoid. These are the pitfalls. This is what the horror audience wants, so let's give them a little bit more kills and stuff like that. But no, I'm excited for it. We're going to start working on it this fall, actually. So I know like Tom is coming back, Bishop's coming back. And I think you're going to see a lot of things that are going to be really interesting in terms of flipping what you know to be true, to all of a sudden be a completely different thing for the sequel. So I'm excited for that.
That's exciting.
Yeah.
Do you have like a start date on when you're going to start shooting, or is that kind of still up in the air right now?
Yeah, so I think we're going to be doing probably the bulk of it's going to be next summer, but then I think we're going to be shooting kind of the opening, like the prologue, this fall. I'm really excited about the people that are involved. So you'll probably recognize some of them when later on. We can talk about this later. But no, I'm excited for the people that are already coming on board. And I think I think the exciting thing to me is like we went through so much hell to make this first film. And I think that the right people are coming on for part two. And then sometimes just to go to the synchronicity of people that have come into our life who are like, wait, you live like 2 doors down from me? Like what the, like this, there's this guy from LA who's a cinematographer who shot some pretty big stuff, and he was from Urbana, and he moved here. We had coffee, and, he worked on this short film that became this huge horror film last year. And we had coffee. It was really great. And then he knew all these people that I knew. And I was like, And then I invited him over for coffee. I'm like, oh, I live on this street. He's like, dude, I live 2 doors down from you. I'm like, what? And there was this insane synchronicity on the first one where when I went to go talk to Aaron Munoz, who teaches acting for camera at U of I, about casting for the first film. I got on the elevator and this guy got on with me who was wearing like this blue coveralls, carrying this big kitchen knife. And he was just a building maintenance worker. But I was just laughing because I'm literally getting on the elevator to go talk to this guy about a slasher movie. And like Michael Myers gets on with me. And I just started laughing, and the guy probably thought I was nuts, but I was just thought like, in what universe do I live in where like the universe speaks to you in a way? Like, why does the universe want me to make this slasher film? I have no idea. It just seems so weird. But you know, like recently I was on a film with Jeremy Holm, who played the Ranger, and we were talking a bit about like other projects and stuff. And I was like, man, like this is so weird, because I feel like sometimes there are signs where the universe kind of whispers to you, you know, about what you should do or the direction that you're on, you know. And he was like, oh, I totally believe that. And so, not to get all metaphysics, you know, whatever.
No, I do. I agree with you. And I think you choose whether you listen to that or not. But if you don't listen to it, I feel like it becomes stronger and stronger and keeps showing up in your face if you don't do something.
Yeah. And I don't know. I think there's just, you know, there's things about the film that have happened. Like we played drive-ins, we went to Kevin Smith's theater, all the stuff that's kind of like nice and window dressing. But I think it's like, you know, I feel like if I've been on a lot of films that had a lot of support, and I feel like ours was made by like a bunch of kids, you know, in a forest who have like, you know, so much heart and kind of courage and patience and a willingness to kind of be in this kind of hole with me, making this film happen. So it's kind of a miracle. So I'm just really excited for where this could go, you know. And I love horror films. I mean, I love, you know, like to see that Scream is still doing it, Halloween is still doing it, all these films. It's exciting. You know, I was joking with Wyatt, who played Peter, when we were out in LA recently. I'm like, you know, it'll be so funny if like 40 years from now we're at some horror con.
Yeah.
This film that none of us ever thought was going to do anything. Because I mean, we had a mutiny in the middle of the shoot where one day this guy fired off this email like saying I was a giant jerk and everybody should like walk off the set. No one did, but he did. But like, but we still managed to survive. So I mean, just it was so crazy. Anyway, just not to get on a totally giving you all the dirt here, but yeah.
No, I mean, I like hearing about, I think it's important to talk about the success, of course, but then it's also important for people out there who are aspiring filmmakers or they want to do it to also know the reality of it, which, you know, I have some other friends that are also filmmakers, and it's the same thing. Like some of the things that you're saying, it's parallel. It's going through all those headaches and, you know, just getting your cast together, getting the right people around you and figuring out some of them aren't the right people.
Right.
That at the end of the day, I think it kind of shapes what the film ultimately becomes. And a lot of times it's a positive.
Oh yeah. I mean, and that was the thing I was trying to, you know, there were days that were tough. I mean, it was a very physically demanding shoot. We stayed at the camp, and, you know, a lot of these locations like didn't have any direct roads. So we were carrying all our stuff through the woods, through these trails, hoofing it down to places, you know. So there's like a bridge sequence. We shot over a bridge at night over a river. And, you know, we had to carry generators and all this stuff. And it was insane. And so we had to always kind of celebrate the moments, you know, that were kind of like heroic in a way for, you know, because I go back to being on all these other sets where they had like $500,000 or $1 million and the director's sitting on his chair sipping a latte. I'm like, no, we were, you know, I was carrying C-stands and yelling at everybody, let's go, you know, lights, you know, whatever. They probably hated me for a while, but again, it's like always to celebrate the miracles that we did and all the crew. And so that's why to me, it's like, you know, they're just as important to this film as anything else. You know, it's like, you know, there's a guy, Cal, on the film, he was a PA intern, and I felt like he was like a hero for a day, and all of them are heroes to me, you know, because but to go to your thing, it's like, yeah, it's not like the velvet rope and the genius of the director. It's the miracle that this ever happened at all, you know, the insanity that you have anything to show for it, you know, so.
And your cast, I mean, it was a really cohesive cast.
Yeah.
And you could kind of feel watching the film that they actually had a very good chemistry and rapport with each other, which I imagine was probably the case off camera, because it really shines through in the film.
Mike? Are you guys coming or what?
I'm good. You got this. Okay.
Yeah, a lot of them, they several of them came from they graduated from University of Illinois, like BFA of Fine Arts and Acting program. And so like the actors who played Lexi, Mike, Georgia, and Ronnie, they all went through the same program together. And then I tried to cast to a lot of the kind of like what I felt they were, and then to get them together, and you can see the camaraderie and the because it's interesting how like you have to cast not only you have to cast your final girl, and then you have to cast the ensemble, but then to even think about the relationship between the final girl and the villain, and that chemistry that they should have too, because I think that's really important too, is to have it's weird to think about like that you should have a chemistry between your hero and your villain, but that should absolutely be there.
Well, look at Laurie Strode and Michael Myers. I mean,
Right. Yeah. And so it's kind of fascinating. And then to go to, I wanted the film to feel like the characters to feel real. Because, remember the early 2000s, everybody was like the cast of the CW. There were these beautiful Abercrombie models. I'm like, I don't relate to that at all. I relate.
No, so I didn't even mean to interrupt. I just got really excited. I was going to mention that when you were talking about, I was talking about the cast, like it's a diverse cast, and it looks like people that you would like your friend group, or people that, because you're right, a lot of films, even some of the films that we grew up watching in the 80s, the women all looked a certain way. The men, you had your beefy, muscular one, the nerd. It was all very formulaic, and especially for the women. And what I love in your film is that, you're representing all people. It's not just one type of person. And for me, that's what was also great about it, is feeling like represented.
Oh yeah. Because I love Georgia's character, Charlie Amaker, who plays Georgia. I just love what she brought. She had a great sense of humor, and kind of like the driving force behind the film was, what if you were really in a slasher film, and not what you think you would do in a slasher film, what you would really do. You're not like fighting Jason and getting your head punched off, and no, you're like freaking out. Like, when you go to like a haunted attraction and you're outside and you're waiting in line and you're talking about how, oh, I'm not going to laugh and I'm not going to freak out. And then you're the first person in, the guy jumps out at you, and then you're tap dancing over people's heads to get out of the room, And so I think Miles, who is probably my favorite in the film, who plays Mario, he was a local actor in Champaign, Urbana. And, when I was cutting the film, and I would go see him at his job sometimes, I'd walk through like, dude, like, I can't wait to show you your scene, because but I feel like as an audience, you want to be able to relate to the characters, and that's so important to me, to be able to, and then to the representation, because like there's a huge Black horror audience that I feel like if I was part of the Black audience, I don't always want to watch like Black trauma on the screen, so I feel like characters that don't need to be living in that world all the time, just like anybody, kind of a thing. And then I don't know, just I could talk about this all day, but just or and to go to like the 80s films with all the misogyny, is to have, female characters in this that are like resourceful and tough and strong, but not like Ripley tough, where there's like almost an invulnerability to it or whatever. But to have people who are like, I love Ronnie's character a lot, because I feel like she's just, someone just talked about her recently as like an undeniable badass or something. But but I just think she's just, like I had this one review where they're like, oh, everybody's just doing the same thing. They're a bunch of idiots. I'm like, no, not really. Because I mean, they're literally like, they put the stretcher together and they're trying to pull their buddy through it to go,
Right.
save the guy's life. And it's like, you don't always see that in films, So anyway.
I'm also not always very trusting of critics when it comes to horror films.
Yeah.
You and I both have read probably a million reviews of films that are horror over the years, and that they're always, not all the time, but most of the time, there's always a cynic, when it comes to the types of films.
Yeah.
But I'm excited about the fact that it will be streaming in this, sometime this summer, so people will actually get to see it. And for you, although right now you're doing these films in the horror genre, talking about a sequel to Final Summer, is there a genre that you would like to work in, or what other types of films come to mind when you think about where you see yourself going?
Oh, absolutely. One of my favorite films is a movie called Breaking Away, that was shot in Bloomington, Indiana. It's about these kind of group of friends. They're kind of outcast social misfits, and they call them like the cutters or the stone cutters. And it's like this guy, he wants to impress this girl. It's like they enter into this race, and Daniel Stern is in it, Dennis Quaid, and it's a really amazing film. But I love films that are like, What's Eating Gilbert Grape, a lot of like Paris, Texas, My Own Private Idaho, all those kind of like I think one of my favorite actors is River Phoenix. I just love those kinds of softer films. And so I would say so to that, I feel like every filmmaker, if you look at their catalog, there's something in their film that's like, even in their first film, that is like exclusively them, and I think that's the challenge, is like you have to figure out like, well, what is it that is me in the film? And I've always been drawn to quieter films, and so I think the one scene that actually I fired an editor over, because I was going to work with this editor and he was bringing on some money, and he got to the scene with at the end where they're in the hospital in the room, right? And he's like, all right, this is what you're gonna do. You're gonna get rid of this film, this scene, because it just kills everything in the whole movie. I'm like, no, I'm gonna get rid of you. So because it's the heart of the film, it's the heart of the film. And it's just this scene between two people talking. And I love that kind of a thing. And so I'm really interested in, when I was at Eberfest, we interviewed Lawrence Bender, and Lawrence Bender started with Intruder, which was a slasher film that he wrote and produced. And I was intrigued by him because he's really inspiring to me, because he went on to produce a lot of Tarantino films and Good Will Hunting, which is one of my favorite films. And so I think I'm drawn to those underdog, kind of off the beaten path stories about, like, I grew up in a small town and I always had dreams of getting the hell out of it, And so I feel, so this film idea I'm working on right now is very much in that vein. It's like almost like a Cinema Paradiso, but a small town version of that. And so I think eventually I'd like to pivot, but I do love horror. I mean, I think I love the visuals of horror, and making it so much fun. When you're like me and Luzzo, who they played the underneath the mask, and they had a dance background and everything. We'd have a blast. I'd be chasing them, like right behind them as they're running after Mario or something. And it was just so much fun. But yeah, thanks for asking that question, because I do feel like there is I would love to get into more dramatic stuff too. So yeah.
And in the film, what I also liked about Final Summer was it, like I mentioned earlier, the cinematography, the cohesiveness of the cast. But I also I'm really big with music. I like, soundtracks to, obviously, here we go. I love soundtracks to horror films, especially. But I liked that. I just liked the music, the atmosphere that it added to the film. And I always feel like music to me in a horror film or in any film really is another character, and it's so important.
No, it was interesting. There was quite an evolution of the music because I had worked. So Jeff, who was in the Smashing Pumpkins, he's a friend of mine, and I kind of had him come on to collaborate with this other composer because he came from like a rock background, and I wanted to kind of work together with this other composer, but then that didn't really quite work out, I think, with workflows. And so then Jeff was going to kind of take on the principal music, but then he, Pumpkins got really busy again. So I would write a lot of like what I was considering to be temp music at the time, which ended up being a lot of the music of the film. And then, but I think to that, there's a song by this band called Slow Dive that was this British kind of shoegaze band. It's called Souvlaki Space Station off of Souvlaki. And that, to me, when I heard that song, I was like, this is what the film should feel like. Should feel dark and mysterious and lush and atmospheric and kind of heavy and like sensual and all this stuff. And so I wanted that mystery of it. And so that's kind of where I was trying to go with the film. And so they're just layers and layers of, feedback guitar and, me, I would be playing my guitar, doing a lot of like delay and then, tones and stuff like that. But, and then I met this other musician, Slavi, through Popcorn Frights, and he did some stuff for Terrifier 2. So he came on with the theme, which was awesome because I felt like I wanted to have a hook to hang the emotion of the film on. And so it's funny, he wrote one theme, like the main theme, and then he wrote a couple other things. But then I was like, he sent me the stems of the main theme, and in that theme there was this one melodic like synth thing, and I was like, oh dude, that's so cool. Like it just had this great mystery to it. And so he wrote all these other stuff for it. I'm like, no, I just like this one single note thing.
I love the synth. I love that part of the music, because I'm just a big fan of that, especially like in horror films. I feel like it's very effective. Yeah.
And so it was the thing that was at the very end of the film when Tom Matthews is kind of in the forest. There's this theme that comes in, and that's this. It was a part of the main theme that I just totally loved. And to go back to John Carpenter's Halloween, it's like, that do 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 do, or Jaws is like two notes, So I think the simplicity of it was what I really loved. And so he's signed on to do he's going to do all of the music for part 2. And part 2 is exciting because it's a time jump to 1993. I graduated high school in 94.
Oh, so did I.
Oh, really? Okay. Yeah. So we're speaking the same. Yeah. So I feel like, to talk to the movies, I feel like this film was like was like Gish, it was Smashing Pumpkins, like scrappy record that they made to the best of their ability. And I feel like the next film to me will be like Siamese Dream, where it's like,
okay,
it's gonna be like hitting it like rock.
But catapulted them. Yeah.
Oh yeah. So, because I feel like I learned so much. We made this under so much difficulty. And it was literally like, there were times when like, I'm like, I need this one shot. So I would go out to the camp to get like 2 seconds of an insert kind of a thing. Cause it's, you're just, you're knitting the whole thing together, with like, elbow grease and everything, versus I feel like the next one it's a little bit more polished or whatever. But I go back to Sam Raimi's Evil Dead. I mean, I love that film, and I love Tobe Hooper's Texas Chainsaw Massacre for that unpolished, rough edge feel, So I mean, Daniel Pearl was the DP on that one. He DP'd so many other films after that, same with like Halloween, and Dean Cundey shot, Jurassic Park, so it's so I feel like everybody has a start somewhere, and it's, you never know. I don't know. Hey, not to talk all day about this stuff, but
no, I love it. I'm so glad we were able to, to talk about the film. If people want to find you on social or learn more about, Final Summer or any other projects you'll be doing, where can they go to find that?
Yeah, so we're on Facebook and Instagram and TikTok at Final Summer Movie. And that's kind of, and then our Final Summer Films is the website. I looked at Friday the 13th's website, so I'm like, all right, well, in case I make another one, because the name was kind of a joke in a way. I was like, just thinking like, like it'd be funny to call anything's Final Anything, and then they make like 8 more of these stupid things, like, eventually they'll be in space. But I think just to go back to the horror fan in me, it's, I grew up on these films, and I remember even talking to Creepy Duck, who did our poster. And I'm sure, like, I'm seeing a lot of the posters behind you too.
Oh, yeah.
The big conversation we have is like, what is it about these films that we keep going back to? And I, as a kid of the 80s, going into the video stores and seeing the posters and not being able to see the film, sometimes the poster is better than the movie, And I think one of the big things that I talked with Colm, who's Creepy Duck, it's the feelings and the emotions that these films make you feel. It's the poster. It's everything. It's like the movie in your head is oftentimes better than the movie you see, So like I go see, Friday the 13th Part 5. And I'm like, oh, this is going to be amazing. The poster looks cool or whatever. And then you're like, yeah, okay. But I think it's the emotions of it. And it's funny because I can see the appeal that it has to the generations that can't see them. It's like my son, who plays Mason in the film,
I didn't know that. That's cool.
Oh yeah. And he's like super ADD like me. And so I was so impressed that he was able to hold still that long. And it was when we did the scene, I went to talk to Tom and the other actor who plays Warren Copper. And I'm like, all right, this is how I want you to approach. I kind of got really emotional and kind of choked up. I'm like, all right. And I couldn't finish what I was going to say for the note. But somehow that really seemed to work, because then everybody just got the right, like everybody was on the verge of tears. And my friend was like, who was gaffing, he's like, is this a horror movie? It's like, but I think that's the thing. I feel like there's a lot of heart behind our film. And so it's just been wonderful. And I think that the people that have kind of seen where we are coming from and see it with the right kind of mindset, I think it's been great, and again, I'm talking to you, talking to all these other fans. It's a wonderful thing to think about how to, and I guess I would say this to all the people who are out there who are filmmakers or want to become filmmakers. It's like, just, you're going to go through a lot of hell, but if you're lucky enough to be here with people appreciating what you're doing, like, that's huge. And I told my friends, like, I don't care if I make any money off this film, is if it gets us in the room to make another one, it's wonderful. I couldn't think of anything that has happened so far and want to do it any differently, well, other than like maybe not like freak out at people when I'm stressed out all the time, but yeah.
Well, but I think that happens. I think especially when you're passionate about what you're doing, you have a vision. I don't care who it is or what the job is, that happens. I think that's a completely normal thing. And I think especially I would imagine, I'm not an actor, really been on a film set, but that's a pressure cooker. There's a lot going on.
That was my biggest lesson, I think, was learning how stress impacts you and how stress impacts everybody around you, because you set the tone and the tone is not always constructive. And I think when I came up, I had a lot of first ADs that were kind of more drill sergeant oriented. And so that made sense to me, but when I've worked with my friends Rob and Sarah on their films, and they were on they did Revealer and Brooklyn 45 that just came out. There's a different tone there, and there's a much more chill environment. I really like that. And I think the last thing I'll say is, this is the thing that I've kind of learned is there's kind of like this Wizard of Oz mentality to a lot of filmmakers, where it's like, this one person's going to do it for me, or this person's going to come along and see the genius of whatever I'm doing, or this person's going to help make the film happen. And it's not like that Wizard of Oz thing where, you get there and you realize they weren't going to help you. And it was up to you and everybody that you came with on that journey. And so I think that's the thing I've been seeing a lot, is just embrace the people. You're going to find the people around you that are going to help you make this dream happen. And when you're getting there, make sure you bring them along, and then always support other people's films too. Because I think as a filmmaker, you're kind of, the whole distribution world is real tough and kind of out to really just, rip you off basically. But if you can get there and you can build that scene, you can take that scene with you, I feel like that gives you an edge. Almost like, like going back to like indie bands and all the bands that we play with and stuff, is like creating that sense of community, creating that sense of a bond with other filmmakers, and that network, that can help you. So then when they're coming to you, it's different than you being just this person on your own.